So this is the next section of completing the square, 8.5. So this is completing the square in order to solve an equation. So the first step it says is move the constant to the other side of the equal sign. So that constant is that plus 7. So the way you move a plus 7 is subtract 7. And that leaves us with x squared plus 6x equals negative 7. So then it says step 2, divide the middle term b by 2, square that number, and then add it to both sides of the equation. So your b value is 6. So what we're going to do to that b value is divide it by 2 and then square it. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So we're going to add 9 to this side of the equation and to this side of the equation because you must keep your equations balanced. So when we do that, we're left with x squared plus 6x plus 9. So equals negative 7 plus 9 is 2. So none of those were like terms. We couldn't combine any of it. We just lined it up together. So now it says cheat factor and simplify the right side of the equation. It actually means the left side of the equation because we've already simplified the right side of the equation into that too. So when we cheat factor, all it means is that we're going to break this down like we did yesterday into x plus 6 divided by 2 is 3 squared equals that 2 that we already had. So the next step tells us take the square root of both sides. Reminder, square root has plus and negative. So when we do the square root of both sides here, we end up with x plus 3 equals a positive or a negative square root of 2. Now the reason why these square roots can be positive or negative, let's say we were looking at the number 16. And this is me just off to the side. You don't have to write this down. If we're looking at the number that's positive 16, the two different ways that we can make that positive 16 is by doing negative 4 times negative 4 and positive 4 times 4. So when you take the square root of 16, you're getting either a negative 4 or a positive 4 as your answer. So it's the same thing when we do the square root in our equations. So when we're finding these solutions to perfect squares using completing the squares, we have one more step to do. So you have to include that positive or negative after the square root. So x plus 3, how do we get rid of the plus 3? You subtract it. And then we're left with x equals, I like to put the negative 3 first just because of that plus or minus, square root of 2. And that's your solution. And if you wanted to break it down a little bit further to separate the plus or minus, what that's really saying is you either have x equals negative 3 plus the square root of 2, or it also equals x equals negative 3 minus square root of 2. So those are your two solutions for this quadratic equation. What that means, just like we talked about in a previous lesson, your solutions are your x-intercepts, your roots, your zeros. So these are the 2 points at which your line would pass through the x-axis. So those are your x-intercepts, which is also known as your solutions, roots, or zeros. So when we flip onto the back, this is just extra practice with the same thing. So you need to follow your steps. So step 1 was add your constant. So we add 15, add 15. And then we're left with x squared minus 2x. And if you want to leave the blank like we did on the first one because you know you're going to be adding something, that's fine. So 0 plus 15 is 15 and you're still going to have that plus blank on both sides. So to find out what goes in the blank, you do your b divided by 2 squared. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is positive 1. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. So when we do this, we've got x, negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1, x minus 1 squared equals 15 plus 1 is 16. So now when we take the square root of both sides, we have x minus 1 equals a positive or a negative 4. So at this point, you can either break it down or you can write your answer and then break it down. I'm going to choose to write my answer, then break it down. So to get rid of that minus 1, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I have x equals 1 plus or minus 4. So to break it down, we got x equals 1 plus 4, so x equals 5. Or x equals 1 minus 4, so x equals negative 3. So this parabola crosses the x-axis in two different places, once at 5 and once at negative 3. So when we go to the next one, it's the same idea. First thing we have to do, add our constant to both sides, and that gives us x squared plus 2x. We know we're going to fill in a blank, equals 0 plus 8 is 8. And you have to keep it balanced. So what you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other. So your b value is 2, divided by 2 is 1, squared is 1. So I'm going to pop a 1 in both of those places. So we have cheat factor, x, 2 divided by 2 is a positive 1, squared, equals 8 plus 1 is 9. So when we take the square root of each side, we end up with x plus 1 equals positive or negative 3, because the square root of 9 is 3. So when we subtract the 1 from both sides, we end up with x equals negative 1 plus or minus 3, which means negative 1 plus 3, which is 2, and negative 1 minus 3, which is negative 4. So our line crosses our x-axis at both 2 and negative 4. So the next one we're going to do is this one. And I'm going to let you guys do this one after we simplify it. So we have x squared minus 2x. Negative 1 plus 2 is plus 1 equals 0. So that's already a perfect square. I'm going to run this one since we started it. So we have negative 2, which is our b value, divided by 2 squared. Sorry, this is already a perfect square. So all we have to do is x minus 1 squared equals 0. So when we take the square root of each side, we have x minus 1 equals 0. So when you add the 1 to both sides, because you can't have a positive 0 and a negative 0, we have x equals 1. That means our parabola only hits the x-axis in one place. So if we looked at that on our graph, it's because it would hit that x-axis in that one place. All right, number 4 I'm going to leave for you guys to do, but we're going to do this one together. So the first thing we have to do is move our constant. So subtract your 24 on both sides, and then we're left with 7x squared plus 14x plus something is going to be negative 15. So when we divide everything, we're going to divide the entire equation by 7. And that way we can eliminate that coefficient in the front. So we have x squared plus 2x plus something equals negative 15 over 7. So when you do your b divided by 2 squared, you end up with 1. So we're going to add 1 here and add 1 here. So when we do that, we end up with x squared plus 2x plus 1, which we can actually go ahead and simplify to x plus 1 squared equals negative 8 over 7. Now, when you go to take the square root, if you pop a square root of a negative number into a calculator, it's going to tell you you can't do that. Reason being, this one has no solution. So if it was on a graph, your parabola would be above or below the x-axis. It would not pass through it. So it doesn't have any roots, any zeros, any solutions, any x-intercepts. So do the other two on your own and use Canvas to check them.